Now that we've learned about the importance of energy to ecosystems, and we've learned some basic language around energy, the ideas of producers and consumers, and we've also learned some of the interactions, or the most important interactions, within ecosystems, we are ready to develop a slightly more sophisticated idea about ecosystems. And today we're going to explore the idea of the so-called trophic pyramids. So rule number 3 is that all organisms exist in a great chain of eating and being eaten. This means that plants are eaten by their parasites and predators, which are in turn eaten by a predator, who in turn is eaten by another predator. And this may go on for another level, but in general, in terrestrial, which means land-based, and that's a vocabulary word you need to know, in terrestrial ecosystems, there are generally only 3 or 4 levels, rarely a 5th level, and that includes the producers as the first level. The following diagram shows this as a food chain, and here you can see that a plant here, the primary producer, is eaten by a mouse, which is eaten by a snake, which is eaten by a hawk. So the food chain illustrates the basic trophic structure of an ecosystem because it shows how energy, which was originally captured by the plants, moves through successive layers of heterotrophs. In an ecosystem, there will be many plants, many herbivores, many predators of the herbivores, and many predators of the predators of the herbivores. Now, you should note that the arrows in this diagram show the direction of energy flow, not who is eating who. Now, let's go back and look at that. You can see here that the arrow shows the energy flow from the plant to the mouse, from the mouse to the snake, and from the snake to the hawk. And this is a mistake that beginning students often make. They think the arrow shows who's eating whom. So this ordering of ecosystems suggests a language for discussing the trophic structure of an ecosystem. And here it is illustrated. At the base, we have the producers, sometimes also called the primary producers, and then they're eaten by the primary consumers, the so-called herbivores. And then the herbivores have their predators, who are the secondary consumer, and now the third trophic level. And then the secondary consumers are eaten by the tertiary consumers, which means the third level consumer, and that's the fourth trophic level. As I say, that's about all we usually have in terrestrial ecosystems. Now, in this slide, what I have done is put together the population size of various species within a desert ecosystem. And in fact, it's within 1 hectare of desert. And a hectare is 100 meters squared. So you think of football fields squared off, and that's about a hectare of land. And you will notice that I've got each species categorized by its trophic level, whether it's a first predator, a second predator, an herbivore, or a plant. And what I want you to do now is look for a pattern between the population size at each trophic level as you go up the trophic level. And you should do the math here and figure out what the pattern is by shutting off your video and then coming back to the video when you have your answer. So hopefully you've done that calculation, and now you can see that as you go to higher trophic levels, the population size decreases. And that, in fact, is rule 4. Population size decreases with increasing trophic level. When we look at ecosystems, we find there are many animals that eat producers, but there are many fewer animals that eat the animals that eat the producers, etc., etc. We can represent this graphically as the so-called pyramid of numbers. And now what I would like you to do is build the pyramid of numbers from the data you just gathered from that last table. Here's what you're going to do. For the total number of producers, draw a rectangle whose area is proportional to the total number of producers. Then for the herbivores, draw a rectangle that sits on top of the producers, where the area is proportional to the total number of herbivores. And then on top of that is going to sit a rectangle that is proportional to the total number of first predators, and the same thing for the second predators. So stop the video, do that, and then send me a picture of your pyramid and put it in your notes. Now you're back, you've done that, and what you should be able to see is this really bizarre pyramid. It doesn't really look like a pyramid. There's a huge base, and then the first level is much smaller, and the second level much smaller than that. And the third level should be really difficult to draw in proportion to the others because it's so small. So the numbers really decrease rapidly as you go up the food chain. A good question to ask at this point is, why do you think population size decreases? And this is a question to which we will return shortly. But before we do that, we're going to go on and look at something else. Here's a graphic of 3 food chains, and I want to ask you, what do you notice about the size of the animals as you go up the pyramid of numbers? What do you notice about the size of the animals? If you need to stop the video, do that. Okay, what you should have noticed is rule 5. As you go up the food chain, the size of animals increases. And as a general rule, the predator is much larger than its prey, and it's usually by about a factor of 10. We'll talk about why that is in a bit. Now, there are some exceptions, and these are rather interesting. For example, wolves hunt caribou and moose, which are larger than they are. Lions hunt elephants and giraffes, which are larger than they are. Can you figure out what's going on there? Yeah, they hunt in packs. So they make up for their small size by having a lot of animals attacking one larger animal. Since each trophic level consists of larger animals, perhaps that accounts for the pyramid of numbers. In other words, maybe there's the same amount of animal at each level, it's just they're larger, so therefore there are fewer of them because they're larger. We're going to look now at biomass at each level, and let's get to the concept of biomass. Biomass is also known as dry weight. And what that means is, let's say I go outside, I want to know the biomass of a tree. I chop it down, I dig up its roots, I chop them up into small pieces, I put them in a giant drying oven, and I drive all the water off. In other words, I evaporate all the water out of there with heat, and then I weigh what I have left. And that is the dry weight, or the biomass. So that's a term you need to know, biomass. Let's see what the trophic structure looks like in terms of total biomass. In other words, we're going to build a biomass pyramid. Here it is. Oh, geez, oh, Pete. We get a pyramid of biomass that looks similar to the pyramid of numbers. It didn't explain very much at all. You can see, once again, we have this huge base and a much smaller second level. And then the third level is much smaller compared to the second level, and so on and so forth. And in fact, you can see that this diagram is incorrectly drawn, because if this is 1,000, right, this is much more than 100, right? There are 10 of these is much larger than this, and 10 of these is much larger than this. So they have shown you this pyramid of biomass, but they haven't drawn it truly to scale because it's hard to do. So now we have 2 pyramids, a pyramid of numbers and a pyramid of biomass. We have no explanation. We're feeling like we're not very good biologists here. The key insight to resolving this is to think about that animals are eating food primarily to gain energy. So we need to understand what animals do with the energy and what limits the energy flow through a food chain. So let's think about that. Does everything you eat go only to biomass, and that would mean growth and reproduction? Does everything that you all eat in your daily life go to children and you getting fatter? No, you know that's true. Why not? If I gave you some time, you'd probably come up with a list. Oh, I do all sorts of things. I move, I make decisions, and my brain is a big energy hog. The cells in my body carry out the process of living. I shed dead parts that have to be replaced, and I replace worn out cells. I eliminate waste, and I thermoregulate. I keep myself warm. So only some of the energy that I eat is put towards growth and reproduction, and those are the 2 categories that would increase biomass. We can draw this as an energy budget, and here's a concept I want you to think about because it's very important, especially when we get to the evolution unit. Here it is. So look at this. Here is an adult Adelie penguin, and look what it uses its energy for. About half of it goes to activity. About half of it, let's say 45%, about 40% goes to metabolism, just its cells staying alive. And here we have thermoregulation, that's about 10%, and then a very small percent, somewhere between 5 and 10%, goes to reproduction on an annual basis. Look at this mouse. It's different yet again, but still, once again, there's no growth in the mouse, the adult mouse or the Adelie penguin. And so they use their energy for reproduction, a small amount, maybe 10, 15%. Most of it is for thermoregulation, and then a smaller amount for basic metabolism, and an even smaller amount for activity. The snake is yet different again because the snake actually grows continuously, and it does have a sizable portion of its energy budget that goes to growth as well as reproduction. The energy budget shows us that some of the energy obtained can be used for growth and reproduction. The rest of it must be used to do other biological things. But there's a second problem, and that is energy transformations can never be 100% efficient because there is another general rule of the universe about energy. You remember the first one, energy can't be created or destroyed, just changes forms. And this second general law of the universe about energy says that every time energy is changed from one form to another form, some of it is lost to the universe as heat. It's almost like the universe is a little bit like the mafia, right? Every time something happens, the universe gets a little cut of it. Yeah, I never thought of it that way. This is such an important observation that it's called the second law of thermodynamics. That every time there's a transition from energy from one form to another, some is lost as heat. And the important thing to know about heat is that heat can't be used for growth or for reproduction or even for metabolism. As a result of these two processes, the second law and the energy budget, each trophic level in the pyramid has less energy in it. But how much less energy is there at each level? Is there a general rule we can find out? So in order to find that out, we're going to Pogo. Pogo are a kind of worksheet that you'll be doing throughout the year. It stands for Process-Oriented Guided Inquiry Learning. In other words, you're teaching yourself some stuff by answering a bunch of questions, and they present you with a visual model that you have to examine in order to learn the material. But before we can do the Pogo, we need to know something about biomass, and that is that biomass is a very good approximation of the amount of energy. So in other words, if you have 10 kilograms of biomass, that is directly proportional to the number of joules of energy in that organism. They're essentially the same thing. And why is that? It's because cells are generally similar and contain similar amounts of energy-containing molecules. And so in general, a kilogram of biomass in two organisms contains the same amount of energy. So now what we know is that as you go up the pyramid, each trophic level contains less energy or less biomass. But what exactly is that relationship from level to level? What does it actually look like? So now it's time for you to Pogo. That's the end of today's video. Until our next class, do the Pogo, think about biology, and ask a lot of good questions. And I'll see you soon.